Okay, I have started recording. I'm sorry, every lecture I forget. So let us go again. We're looking at how to work out the product of a Wittig reaction first, and then we'll look at the mechanism of the Wittig reaction. So first we identify our carbonyl carbon, and we identify the carbon to which the halide is attached. And by putting an asterisk, we can track which carbons are going to be involved in the double bond, because it's going to be these two. I also suggest reorienting your compounds where you have the carbonyl pointing towards the carbon-bromine bond, or the carbon halide bond, to be more general. I think that makes it easier for you to see the product as it is formed. And as we mentioned before we started recording, that we're going to lose the oxygen, and we're going to lose the halide, and we're going to lose the hydrogen. And so you can just erase those fragments, erase those atoms, and then you have these two fragments, this 3-carbon fragment and this 2-carbon fragment, and you just draw a double bond between these 2 carbons. Let's just clean that off. You draw a double bond. And that's how you get your product, right? So that's how we work it out. Let's do another example. Here, this time, instead of our ketone, we're doing an aldehyde, but it undergoes the Wittig reaction just the same. We know that we're going to lose the carbonyl oxygen, and we're going to lose the halide and a hydrogen. And notice that the halide and the hydrogen are both attached to the same carbon. So those are going to go. And in the product, we have our alkene with our double bond being formed between the carbonyl, what used to be carbonyl carbon, and what used to be the carbon that had the halide attached. It's the same process. We mark our reactive carbons, or carbons that are going to end up in our double bonds. We redraw to orient our carbonyl and our C halide bond, so we can see where the double bond is going to form, and then we know the groups that we're going to lose: the oxygen, the halide, and one of the hydrogens. We have our fragments. We have this 4-carbon fragment and this other 4-carbon fragment, and our double bond is going to be between these 2 carbons, and this is our product. So following those steps, it should be fairly straightforward to work out the product of the Wittig reaction. Any questions so far about working out the product? All right, so we seem okay with that. So now the mechanism. Now the mechanism is important. It's broken into 4 steps, and you need to know how to put arrows for all 4 steps. Because in a Wittig reaction, the first thing is that the alkyl halide is a starting material, yes, but it is not the active starting material. It's not the one that does everything to form the carbon-carbon double bond. It actually has to be converted into something known as a phosphonium salt. The phosphonium salt then gets converted into the nucleophile, and that nucleophile has a special name seen here, ylide. And then you react the 2 carbonyl and the ylide. So our carbonyl is our electrophile, and we know that our carbonyl carbon is electrophilic because it's delta positive. We've spoken about that several times. And then we have an elimination process to give the double bond. So let's look at these. All right, first step, formation of our phosphonium salt. So phosphonium refers to a positively charged phosphorus, and we're going to see where that comes into play in just a minute or so. But forming our phosphonium salt is a substitution reaction. So we have this reagent known as triphenylphosphine, and I've expanded it out here. So you can see that the pH represents this ring, which is also known as the phenyl group. So this is the actual accurate structure of triphenylphosphine. This is the shorthand structure. We prefer you to use the shorthand structure, so you do not have to draw all of this out, but you do need to appreciate that pH means a phenyl ring. And capital P, common H when you're talking about phenyl. So looking at our substitution reaction, what is going to be our nucleophile? What is going to be our electrophile in this reaction?
Phosphorus is the nucleophile.
Why? Why do you say nucleophile, Rajan?
Rajan. Low electron.
Right. All right. So we see that phosphorus is electron rich, and our carbon is delta positive because it's attached to this electron withdrawing halide. And so we can have a substitution reaction. What kind of substitution reaction? Would it be SN1 or SN2? Why, Nadisha? Why do you say it's SN2? If you don't want to unmute, you type it in the chat. All right, it is a primary alkyl halide. Primary. So remember the features that we use to determine whether something is undergoing SN1 or SN2. Good, good. All right. So our nucleophile is going to form a bond. So it's donating these electrons to our electrophilic carbon. If you're forming a bond, we need to be breaking one of the bonds, and the easiest bond to break is going to be the carbon-bromine bond. And when you break your carbon-bromine bond, this is what we get. So this is known as a phosphonium salt, and we know a salt has a positively charged portion and a negatively charged portion. This positively charged phosphorus makes all of this positively charged, and the negative counter anion is or Br minus. And so we formed a bond between phosphorus and carbon, and we've broken a bond between carbon and bromine. So this is step one of the Wittig reaction, forming our phosphonium salt. So the fact that we have this positively charged phosphorus is what allows us to have the second phase of the Wittig reaction. Because if the carbonyl is going to be the electrophile, we need to transform what's left of our alkyl halide into the nucleophile. And having this positively charged phosphorus helps us to do that. So the green arrows are showing electron withdrawing by the inductive effect. So the positively charged phosphorus is pulling electron density away from the carbon, and the carbon in turn starts pulling electron density, hydrogens that are attached to it. And what effect, well, it says it right here. Okay, this weakens the carbon-hydrogen bond, because if you're polarizing the bond and you're putting most of the electron density to the carbon, and then that's being further pulled towards the phosphorus, if you're distorting the bond, you're weakening the bond. And so it's easy to break these carbon-hydrogen bonds under the right conditions. And so if we use a strong base, and so what we're using in this example is tert butoxide, we can pull one of these hydrogens. So when we've weakened a carbon-hydrogen bond, we've actually made it acidic, because something acidic can lose a hydrogen. So our base is pulling this proton right here. So we're forming a bond between oxygen and hydrogen. And if we're forming a bond, we need to be breaking a bond. And if we're breaking this carbon-hydrogen bond, the electrons are going to go onto the carbon atom. And so we've generated our nucleophile. And our nucleophile is known as an ylid. Any species that has separated charges, you have a positively charged on one on one atom, and right beside it you have a negative charge on another atom. It's known as an ylid. So this is a phosphorus ylid, and this is going to be.
And go through that again, please, from the oxygen.
Okay, so the carbon-hydrogen bond is weakened. You got that part, or you want me to jump back a little more?
Yeah, I got that part.
Okay, so we've weakened the carbon-hydrogen bond. Remember, this hydrogen is now electron deficient in a sense, because most of the electron density is being pulled towards this carbon. And so when you have something that's electron rich, like a base, it can donate electron density to form a bond with hydrogen. And if you're forming an oxygen-hydrogen bond, you're going to be breaking this carbon-hydrogen bond. And in breaking the bond, remember, each line represents a pair of electrons. So this oxygen has donated one of its lone pairs to hydrogen to form an oxygen-hydrogen bond. this carbon-hydrogen bond is going to break, and those pair of electrons represented here by these two dots are now on this carbon, and we now have a negatively charged carbon, right? It has a lone pair plus 1, 2, 3 bonds. It's now negatively charged. Did that help you, Davina?
Yes, Miss. Thank you.
Okay, Nadisha, go ahead.
Hi, Miss. For the carbon that is next to the negatively charged carbon, it now has 2 hydrogen. Why?
Oh, sorry. No, that's my mistake. It should be 3.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. That's my mistake. Copy and paste and did it wrong. So it should still have 3 hydrogens. Sorry about that. All right, so we have our nucleophilic carbon, and now our nucleophile can react with our electrophile. But before we do that, there's a resonance form for this ylide. What do we think it's going to look like? Anyone? You can type it.
It's it's a double bond between the charged carbon and the phosphorus.
All right, correct. So we see that we can donate electron density here, and we can have this phosphorus carbon double bond. And this version of the ylide is a phosphorine. So both of them interconvert, right? So in some questions, you will see the ylide reacts with da 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 da, or the question may say the phosphorane reacts with, and you know it's the same thing. It's just we're talking about the same compound but different resonance forms. All right, so here we have generated our nucleophile. So all of that was just to generate the nucleophile. We now have this carbon being nucleophilic, and we know that, or let's put up the pointer, we know that this carbon was already electrophilic. And I'm suggesting that you draw your structures to line up where negative is aligned with positive and negative is aligned with positive, because we know that in our arrow pushing for mechanism, the arrow is going to come from a region of high electron density going to an electron deficient region. So our nucleophile is going to attack our electrophile. And if we're forming now a carbon-carbon bond, because that's what this arrow means, that this pair of electrons is being donated from this carbon to the carbon in blue. So we're forming a carbon-carbon bond. And if we're forming a bond, we need to be breaking one of these bonds. And in breaking this carbon-oxygen bond, instead of the electrons just staying on the oxygen, these electrons from the pi bond here in the carbonyl are now going to be donated to this positively charged phosphorus. And so we're forming 2 bonds. We're forming a carbon-carbon bond, and we're now forming an oxygen-phosphorus bond. And so we end up having this 4-membered structure that is known as an oxaphosphatane. Right? Ethane, when you see ethane, it tells you that it's a 4-membered ring. He's just telling you what is involved in the 4-membered ring. So we formed a carbon-carbon bond, and we formed an oxygen-phosphorus bond. And this intermediate is what's going to break down. Yes, go ahead, Nadisha.
Miss, can you go over the mechanism again for me, please?
Okay, let's jump back. So our first step is our nucleophile is going to react with our electrophile. So we're forming a carbon-carbon bond. Now this carbon that we're reacting with already had 4 bonds to it. So if we're forming a new bond, we have to be breaking an old bond, and our polarized bonds are the ones that always break first. So we're going to break this polarized bond. 2 of these electrons in this pi bond here are going to now go and be donated to the phosphorus. So we are forming a bond, we're breaking a bond, and electrons from the broken bond are going to be donated to the phosphorus. Because if you think about it, if we just formed the bond and those electrons were on the oxygen would be negatively charged and this would be positively charged, and a bond could just form like that. So the reaction is concerted. As you're forming the carbon-carbon bond, you're also forming the oxygen-phosphorus bond. Yes, Sarah?
Miss, I don't remember if you said this or if I just didn't hear. Into the the hydrogen that the oxygen pulled, is this a different molecule of?
The hydrogen that pulled was attached to this carbon. So this CH2 should be a CH3, sorry. That's probably what's...
No, miss. No. Miss, in the previous slide, the
The hydrogen that was
right.
attached to this carbon, the base
Yes,
pulls
miss.
it. When a base pulls the hydrogen, it takes it and goes off with it. All right, so hold on. When the base pulled this hydrogen, notice now, if I were to draw the, we would have formed, there we go. And we know that these are CH3s. So oxygen has formed a bond with the hydrogen that used to be attached to that carbon. All right. So this is the byproduct that's formed. When our tert-butoxide acts as a base, we form tert-butanol, and we also generate our ylide. Does that clear up things a little bit?
Yes, miss. I just realized that there were also two different. It didn't register that there were two different
Carbon.
things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's hop on back. We've made our nucleophile. Our nucleophile is forming bonds with our electrophile. We're forming a carbon-carbon bond, and we're forming an oxygen-phosphorus bond. And we have our oxophosphatane intermediate. And this is what's going to break down to give us our alkene. Notice our alkene is going to be all of this over here on the right. And then we're going to lose all of this on the left as a byproduct. And we need to work out how do we push arrows to show that we're forming a carbon-carbon double bond here, and we're breaking these bonds that would have connected our four-membered ring. And so we look at polarity. We know that oxygen is more electronegative from carbon, so it is going to take electrons from this carbon and donate it to the phosphorus. And so now we're forming an oxygen-phosphorus double bond. So we're breaking this bond and we're forming an oxygen-phosphorus double bond. But if we're forming a new bond with the phosphorus, which can only accommodate 5, we need to break an old bond between the phosphorus and the carbon. And when we're breaking that old bond, these electrons, shown represented by this line in orange, can be donated to form the double bond. So once again, the oxygen is taking electron density from the carbon and donating it to the phosphorus. So we've broken this carbon-oxygen bond. If oxygen took away electrons from this carbon, it means that this carbon is going to be deficient, right? Now, as oxygen has taken away electrons and given it to phosphorus, we're now forming 5 bonds with phosphorus. And that's the maximum that phosphorus can accommodate. So if we're forming a new bond, we have to be breaking an old bond. As we break this phosphorus-carbon bond, the pair of electrons that phosphorus and carbon used to share are now being donated to this deficient carbon. And we're going to end up with our alkene, with our bond, and we have our byproduct known as triphenylphosphine oxide. Why would the oxygen just spontaneously do that? Part of it is stability. So this 4-membered ring is not very stable and it's very strained, because remember, these pHs represent these big 6-membered aromatic rings. These 4-membered rings are not the optimal bond angle. Remember, our single bonds or sp3 hybridized bonds want to have 109, right? And we also, so that's driving the reaction in terms of congestion. And then look at the stability of the products. Right, yes, Marcel is answering in the chat too. Look at the stability of the products. So we're moving from these 4 sigma bonds in this very strained arrangement to having some sp2 hybridized bonds here, which are going to be lower in energy and also stronger. So those factors are what's driving the reaction. Right? Does that help a bit, Nadisha? Okay. All right. So let's do one more example, because the Wittig mechanism, it looks very weird at first, but the more you practice it, and you must practice it. After the lecture, what you need to draw compounds and practice the mechanism. Yes, please go ahead, Rajan.
What was the name of the final byproduct?
Oh, it's triphenyl phosphine oxide. So the triphenyl, we have 3 phenyl groups. This is a phosphine oxide that we have this phosphorus oxygen double bond.
Okay.
That's the byproduct. All right, so let's look at the mechanism again. The more we look at it, the less weird it looks. So this time we're using our aldehyde, and this is the other alkyl halide. We know what the product looks like. We know how to work that out. Let us see if we know how to do the mechanism. So what's the first step of the mechanism, folks? Forming the salt. And what kind of reaction forms the salt, the phosphonium salt?
SN2 reaction.
An SN2 reaction. Good. So we have our substitution reaction. So first thing, nucleophile, electrophile. Notice in organic chemistry, it's always electrons being donated by something that's electron rich to something that is electron deficient. So our triphenylphosphine is our nucleophile. It donates electrons, and we break our carbon iodine bond, and we generate, sorry, this should be our phosphonium salt. Our phosphonium salt, we know that the carbon-hydrogen bonds are weak, and so if we have a strong base, our base can pull the hydrogen. And if we pull the hydrogen, that pair of electrons goes onto the carbon, and we've generated our ylide, which is our nucleophile in the reaction. And this is just a resonance form of our nucleophile. And nucleophile is going to react with our electrophile, and we try and draw it to have the negative and positives matched up, so it's easier to draw our 4-membered ring. We have our nucleophilic carbon forming a bond with our electrophilic carbon, so we're forming a new carbon-carbon bond. We're going to be breaking an old carbon-oxygen bond, so the polarized bonds tend to break first. In breaking this carbon-oxygen bond, the electrons that used to be in this pi bond are now being donated by the oxygen to phosphorus, and we now have an oxygen-phosphorus bond. We form our oxaphosphatane again, and we note that all of this side of the molecule is going to end up in our product, and this side of the molecule is going to be waste material. It's going to be a byproduct. And in our you have to push the arrows in the right direction, guys. We can't just randomly say, yes, this, and boom, we formed our product. The more electronegative oxygen is going to take electron dense carbon. So if you remember how to start, then it's easy to work out how to finish. If we're breaking this oxygen-carbon bond, the electrons are going to go down to this phosphorus, right? Forming a bond, a new bond with phosphorus, we have to break an old bond because we've reached capacity. It's 5 bonds. And if we're breaking this phosphorus carbon bond, this pair of electrons is going to be donated to form the pi bond with the rest of our carbon. And so the product that we get here. All right. So this is the Wittig reaction. Are we okay so far before we move on? Yes. Yes, it is. It is a pi bond in the C double bond O bond that is donating electron density. Okay. So practice and look at the direction of your arrows. As Marcel pointed, do stuff that you learn in inorganic chem about one polarity and stuff to work out, okay, which one is going to give electrons, which one is going to take electrons. All right, very quickly, this is just a summary of what we did. This is what you need to be able to do. You need to be able to work out the product as well as to know the mechanism back to front. somebody should wake you up in middle night and you should be able to draw it. So before we quickly move on to the next product, I wanted to remember about product, the next topic. Let's go through a question, and there's some more sample questions that are in the PDF that is posted. I'm just choosing one to go through for today's lecture. Here's a question that you could get. So you're told that 3-methyl-cyclohexa, that shouldn't be there, hexanone, is added to tert butoxide and methyl triphenylphosphonium bromide. And this looks like such a strange sentence, but we're going to break it down bit by bit. Right away, we know that tert butoxide is a base. We have a ketone and we have a phosphonium salt. And so let us step by step work out what's happening. First thing, draw structures and pick up marks. Yes, Marcel, cheerlead, tell them. First, you need to interpret what your question is saying. 3-methyl-cyclohexanone, what does that look like? 3-methyl is telling you where the substituent is and what kind of substituent. The cyclo is saying that it's a ring. The hex is telling you it's a 6-membered ring. And the one is telling us it's a ketone, and bam, we put it together. We have our carbonyl group and we have our methyl at the 3 position. So we have one of our reactants right here. This very long word, methyl triphenylphosphonium bromide, all that's telling us is that we have a phosphonium salt. All of this triphenylphosphonium is just this part of the molecule. A positive phosphorus with 3 phenyls. See, tri is 3, phenyl, phosphonium, it's positively charged. And the methyl is telling you that there's a CH3 directly attached to the phosphorus, and the bromide is just the counter ion. So by interpreting the question, we know what our reactants look like. And then it's applying the process from before. We know that we're going to lose the carbonyl oxygen. We also know we're going to lose one of the hydrogens from the carbon, and we also know that all of this section of the molecule is going to be lost as a byproduct. So we can essentially erase those. We're left with 2 fragments, and we know that they're going to be joined to this position and this position, and we have our answer. All right, so whenever you see something like this, you do it step by step, and you earn marks as you go along. How we're going to do this online, I'm not sure, but you earn marks as we go along. All
Yes,
right.
you can do that one more time, please.
The question? Okay, let's go.
Yes.
All right, first step in the question is to draw the structures that the words represent. We broke down the names of each of our structures to be able to figure out what it looks like. ON tells us that we have a ketone. The cyclohex tells us that we have a 6-membered ring. That is a ketone. And the 3-methyl tells us that we have a substituent, which is a methyl, which is at position 3. So this is 1, 2, 3. We have one of our reacting partners. We have methyl triphenylphosphonium bromide. Methyl, we know is a CH3. Triphenylphosphonium is just a positively charged phosphorus with 3 phenyls attached to it, which is this, right? So I would draw this part first, the phosphorus with the 3 phenyls attached. Then whatever this word is, it's telling me the number of carbons that are attached to the phosphorus. And this last part is telling me whatever the counter ion was, all right? It happens to be a bromide. And it's not participating in the reaction. It's not particularly important. And then we know the steps to work out our product. We know that in a Wittig reaction, the carbonyl oxygen is gone. And we also know we lose a hydrogen from this carbon. And we know that all of our triphenyl phosphorus part goes as a byproduct. So we erase everything that is circled in red. And we're left with the fragments that are going to be put together to give our product. And we know that wherever the carbonyl was, that's where the double bond is going to end up. And so we put the double bond where, notice where the carbonyl was, that's where we have our double bond. And we only have 1 carbon from our other reactant. And so this is the alkene that we have formed. All right, so it's something that once you practice, it becomes very, very fluid. So as I mentioned, there are some other practice questions that I did step by step in the PDF. I want you to go through them. First, try the question by yourself and then look at the solutions. So the last topic in carbonyl compounds is how they can act as nucleophiles. Yes, well, yes, it is how you do it in the exam. You would do it step by step. That's how you would work it out on your piece of paper. And then it depends on what the question asks. If the question asked you for a mechanism, then you would arrow push. But notice this question just asks you, let me go back. It just asks you to draw the structure of the product. And so that's important. That's a very good question. You only answer what is asked. So if you went and drew mechanism and did all the fancy stuff, you're still not getting more than 4 marks and you would have wasted time. All right, so read the question carefully. This one didn't ask for mechanism, so you wouldn't need to put it. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Rajan.
Miss, what would cause the reaction to proceed with a secondary halide?
To make the triphenyl, to make the phosphonium salt?
Yes, miss.
Remember, secondary halides can still undergo SN2 depending on the conditions, you know. Right? And you would just tweak your reaction conditions to have an SN2. So you'd have the right solvent, and the triphenylphosphine is a pretty good nucleophile. So you'd do that way. But tertiary alkyl halides are not going to be used in Wittig reactions.
Okay.
Yeah, first, they can't undergo the SN2, and second, they don't have a hydrogen that you can pull off to generate your nucleophile.
Yes.
Right, yeah. Alrighty, so now we've just looked at how a carbonyl was the electrophile. Now we're going to look at conditions that we can turn our carbonyl into a nucleophile. All right, so before we do that, talk about the alpha carbon. So the alpha carbon in any structure is the carbon beside the functional group, right? And for these structures, these are all carbonyl compounds. The functional group is C double bond O. So any carbon beside the C double bond O is going to be referred to as the alpha carbon. So we use the Greek alphabet to indicate our carbons. And then any carbon beside an alpha carbon is going to be the beta. So in the Greek alphabet is what? Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, etc., etc. So alpha is the one beside the functional group, and what is beside the alpha is known as the beta. So if we look at our third example, it has 2 alpha carbons, and it also has 2 beta carbons as well. All right, so now that we know the terms, let's apply them. When you have your carbonyl compound acting as a nucleophile, it's the alpha carbon that is acting as a nucleophile. So note, when our carbonyl compound is acting as the electrophile, the C double bond O is the reacting part. When it's acting as a nucleophile, it's the alpha carbon. Nadisha, your question. No, the alpha carbon. So if you had a alkyl halide, now why I choose to draw a bromine. If you have an alkyl halide, right, you're going to have your alpha carbon and your beta carbon. Same for all of for everything, for everybody. Your amines, your carboxylic acids, your ketones, your aldehydes. And that's why, I don't know if you've come across the term, when you're forming an alkene from an alkyl halide, we talk about beta elimination. It is the hydrogen from the beta carbon that is lost to give you your double bond. So for all of the structures, the alpha and beta applies. Why did I draw it out when it was right? Yes, Nadisha, go ahead.
Miss, what I meant was, I know that all structures have alpha and beta, but for the alkyl halide, the alpha carbon, isn't it the one that has the halide attached to it?
Because the halide is a functional group.
So I thought that the alpha carbon for carbonyl compounds would be the carbon with the oxygen on it.
No, because a functional group is all of, let me circle it, all of
Oh,
this is the
oh,
functional group, right?
okay.
Yeah, is that clear enough? Yeah. So all
Yes,
of
ma'am.
functional groups, so the alpha is the one that has the functional group attached to it. And so under certain conditions, we can have our alpha carbon becoming a nucleophile, and then it reacts with an electrophile. And so in our product, you're going to have the bond, the new bond is going to be formed between the alpha carbon and this carbon right here. And so that's our product. And notice that we've lost a hydrogen. We must, so that we can form this new bond. So we've lost a hydrogen and we've lost a Br, and this is our product right here. Similarly, if we have this aldehyde and we are reacting it with our electrophile, then the new bond is going to be between the alpha carbon and the carbon that's bearing the halogen. And so this is going to be our product, where the alpha carbon and this carbon have formed the new bond. And here we have alpha carbon, but this time I'm drawing the line structure, but still the alpha carbon is going to form a bond with our electrophilic carbon here. It's just that this time, as we form a bond, we broke this pi bond and we formed a structure here. So we're going to go through all of these. Oh, yes, before we go through the mechanism for all of these, you would have noticed that some structures have more than one alpha carbon, and so the reaction can take place at both of our alpha carbons if you have enough electrophile. All right, so if you had more than one equivalent of your electrophile, meaning the reaction could take place here, and then you still have some left over to take place at the other alpha carbon. All right, so that you would read the question carefully, and it will indicate whether the reaction is taking place with just, actually we will tell you, you will see excess in the question if it is that we want you to have it reacting more than, we'll be specific in that way. All right, why is it that the alpha carbons can act as nucleophile? It is a similar process to how our triphenyl phosphonium salt could act as a nucleophile. We have this electron withdrawing inductive effect, which ends up weakening a carbon-hydrogen bond, and therefore it can be pulled by a base. So the same concept that we discussed for our phosphonium salt and why it is we could pull a hydrogen is the same thing for our carbonyl compound. We have this electron withdrawing carbonyl group. So oxygen is pulling electron density from the carbon, which in turn starts pulling electron density from the carbons to which it is bonded. And then these carbons are pulling from the hydrogens. And that's going to weaken the carbon-hydrogen bond. So in the presence of a base, we can break that carbon-hydrogen bond, and then those electrons can go onto our alpha carbon. So very similar to the first part of the Wittig reaction. The base I'm using in this example is hydroxide, but other bases you'll see in questions, you could use ethoxide, you could use tert-butoxide. Those are some other bases that you will see. So where base is pulling this hydrogen, we're forming our oxygen-hydrogen bond, we're breaking this carbon-hydrogen bond, and these electrons can go and rest on the carbon, and the carbon is negatively charged. And this is known as a carbanion for fairly obvious reasons, right? And just as how our ylide has a resonance form, our carbanion also has a resonance form. Anyone want to kind of take a shot at what that would look like? What would our carbanion resonance form look like? Hello?
We would have a double bond between the carbonyl C and the alpha carbon, the negative alpha carbon.
Right, so we would push electron density here to form a bond here, and as we're forming a bond, we're breaking a bond. So this is what our resonance form of our carbanion would look like. Notice that the pi bond has essentially switched places. We had a pi bond between carbon and oxygen. And now we have pi bond between carbon and carbon. Initially, the carbon was negatively charged, and in this resonance form, the oxygen was negatively charged. So we have our resonance structures, and this is just when your enolate comes from ene, like you have in an alkene, and olate tell you that the oxygen is negatively charged. Right, so there's our resonance form, but we're going to use our carbanion as our nucleophile, just as how we used our ylide as our nucleophile. But I wanted you to be aware of terms, because in the question, you could be told that the enolate reacts with, or the carbanion reacts with, and you just know that they're resonance forms of each other. But the reaction is going to take place at the carbon. So in terms of alkylation, it's a substitution reaction. It just so happens that all of this is the nucleophile and the new bond is being formed at the alpha carbon. So our base is going to pull this hydrogen, and these electrons are going to go onto the carbon, and we've generated our carbanion. So that's the first step. We generate our nucleophile. Yes, so we need a strong, so our ethoxides or hydroxides or terbutoxide is what will do it for these reactions. Well, technically that's not 100% true, but for the purposes of this course, yeah, we'll stick to strong bases. Yeah. If you go into second year, we'll tell you that this was all a lie and tell you something different. But for now, a strong base is what's going to deprotonate. All right. So we form our carbanion, and yeah, and I'm not going to fix up my statement because then I'll confuse you even more. Just for the purposes of this course, base, strong base. Yes, good. So we've generated our nucleophile, or negatively charged carbon. This is just our regular SN2 reaction. So we know that our nucleophile is coming in, we're forming a carbon bond, and we're making a carbon-bromine bond. And so we have our product here. And notice that's why we lost a hydrogen, and that's why we lost a bromine in our product. We had to lose a hydrogen in order to make this a nucleophile. And as soon as our nucleophile reacted with our alkyl halide, the bromine had to leave. And so this is alkylation of our ketone. And so we've extended the carbon chain. And here's another step where our nucleophile can act, our ketone can act as a nucleophile. We do it again, deprotonation. Our base is hydroxide this time, pulls the hydrogen, these electrons go onto the alpha carbon. This is our nucleophile, right? This carbon is nucleophilic. We are reacting this carbon nucleophile with a ketone, and we're having our nucleophilic addition reaction. And this particular nucleophilic addition reaction is referred to as an aldol reaction, right? So an aldol addition is when you have a carbon nucleophile reacting with our ketone or our aldehyde, right? We're forming a new carbon bond. We're breaking one of the carbon-oxygen bonds. We form this alkoxide intermediate, and then we can just protonate this from water or whatever solvent, and we get what's known beta hydroxy compound. Yes, Nadisha?
Miss, you're going really fast. Can you go over this aldol addition, please?
Okay, all right, no problem. So we've done addition reactions before. So we have done reactions where nucleophiles add to our ketones. So we've shown where amines can add to our ketones, how cyanide can add to our ketones, how alcohols can add to our ketones. This is a similar thing, but instead of those nucleophiles, we have a carbon nucleophile that was generated from an alpha carbon. So it's similar, it's just that we're using a different nucleophile. And in our addition reactions, when a nucleophile reacts with a carbonyl compound, our nucleophile comes in and gives a pair of electrons to our carbon. And as we're forming a new bond, we break an old bond, right? This time, the nucleophile happens to have come from this ketone here. So our base pulled this hydrogen and broke this carbon-hydrogen bond. The pair of electrons that was in the bond are now going to be on this carbon. This negatively charged carbon is nucleophilic. So it is now donating this pair of electrons to our electrophilic carbon. So we're now forming a bond between this carbon here and this carbon of our reacting ketone. Where this carbon already had 4 bonds. So if we're forming a new bond, we need to be breaking an old bond, and the polarized bonds break first. So this pair of electrons that used to be in this carbon-oxygen double bond are now going to go onto the oxygen. And so we have this negatively charged oxygen right here. And this is the new bond that we've just formed. Is that a little bit clearer, Nadisha and others? Because you probably spoke on behalf of others.
Miss, we're essentially reacting a carbonyl compound with another carbonyl compound.
Right, but we turned this carbonyl compound into a nucleophile first.
Okay. Okay.
Right. Yes. And the base is what did it. The base is what turned this into a nucleophile. Right? And so this beta hydroxy compound is the term that we use to describe structures that look like this. And the name, let's go through it. This is a carbonyl group. This is the alpha carbon. And remember, any carbon beside the alpha carbon is known as the beta carbon. And we have an OH on the beta carbon. And so that's why it's referred to as a beta hydroxy compound. Right? And that's one way to check if your structure is correct. If you have gone through all of this and your OH is not on the beta carbon, it means that you need to check something out. All right? So we form a beta hydroxy compound. And this part that I was mentioning is that we like to give every reaction a special name in chemistry. So all this is a nucleophilic reaction with a carbonyl compound, but we call this particular one an aldol addition reaction. Right? So that's what I was pointing out. And you may see in your text, the aldol addition reaction is, and I just wanted you to know what the term was referring to. Here's another example of the aldol addition reaction, but this time we're going to react one molecule of this ketone with itself. So half of the molecules we will treat with base, and we will turn it into a carbanion. So our base pulls this hydrogen, and the electrons go onto the alpha carbon. So now we've generated our nucleophile. Then we add the other half of the ketone. Notice it's the same ketone. This ketone is the same ketone, but half of it we treated with base and converted it into the nucleophile. The other half we then added to the reaction mixture. And so our nucleophile is going to react with our electrophile. So it's still the same addition reaction. We're adding a nucleophile to this electrophile. We're forming a new carbon-carbon bond, and we're breaking an old bond, and our polarized bond breaks first. Our pair of electrons here is going to go onto the oxygen, and we form this negatively charged intermediate, which can then take a hydrogen from, remember we formed ethanol at the start here. Ethoxide took this proton, formed ethanol, and now the oxygen can take back the proton from the ethanol to regenerate our ethoxide. And once again, we form a beta hydroxy compound. This is our carbonyl. This is one of our alpha carbons. The carbon beside the alpha carbon is a beta carbon, and we have our OH, we have our hydroxy group on the beta carbon. And so we formed a beta hydroxy compound by reacting a ketone with itself, but half of it we turned into the nucleophile, and the other half we left as the electrophile. How much of the base? Oh, okay, usually that's why we have called stoichiometry, and usually we would pre-mix. So in response to Sarah's question, she's asking, how do we control that some is a nucleophile and some of the molecule is an electrophile? We would have our ketone in our reaction flask, and we'll stir it with base. And once we have like a 1-to-1 or even a 1-to-1 mole ratio of base, it would pull all the protons. So all of our ketone would now be a nucleophile. And then we would add some more of the ketone. and it is in the form of the electrophile. And as it is added, it's going to just react very quickly, and we will form our hydroxy compound. Right, so stoichiometry is not just important like in titration or so, but in organic synthesis, you really have to work out your mole ratios to ensure that you get the product that you want and you get the reaction that you want. And I know it's 6 o'clock, but 2 last slides, and then we're done. Phenyl or beta hydroxy compound can be converted into other things by dehydration, which we know is loss of water. And so we have, there's a hydrogen here. Let me draw it out, or try to draw it out. There we go. So even though it wasn't explicitly shown, we know that there's a hydrogen right here, just as how we know there are 2 hydrogens here, 2 hydrogens here, 2 hydrogens here. And we know dehydration is the loss of H and OH, and they have to be on carbons beside each other. So we're going to lose this OH, and we're going to lose this H, and we're going to form a double bond where they used to be. And that's for any dehydration reaction. When we're looking at the formation of alkenes from alcohols, it was the same thing. So just by heating our beta hydroxy compound, we lose water and we form a double bond right here. And this class of compound where you have double bond, then single bond, then carbonyl, is known as an alpha beta unsaturated compound. And the alpha beta tells you that the double bond is between the alpha carbon and the beta carbon. And that's something you can use as a check as well, that you've drawn the correct structure, that your double bond must be between the alpha carbon and the beta carbon. And the final slide is just showing you the other example. This was the other beta hydroxy compound that we just made from that other reaction. We're going to lose a hydrogen from the alpha carbon and an OH from the beta carbon, and we're going to have a double bond where they used to be. And this is also known as an alpha beta unsaturated compound. All right, so that is that for carbonyl chemistry. We are with carbonyl chemistry. Any questions? Someone's mic is on. Marcel, is that you?
Oh, yes, Dr. Brown. Sorry, I was just saying that some students are asking about the exam next semester next week up to where for the organic.
Up to this week. So all of Grignard and all of carbonyl chemistry is going to be on the course test. All right, so Nioka wants the first slide, the first slide, slide 1 of 68. Why are you stressed, sir? Okay, sorry, Andrea, while I go back to the first slide, do you want to ask your question? While I click back, type it in the chat.
Miss,
Yeah. Yes.
is this stuff coming on the exam?
Yes, sir. If you mean by this, if this stuff you're referring to this lecture, then yes. This is a part of carbonyl chemistry, sir. The one where we started today. Yeah, I'm heading back to the first slide of today's class. What you mean? Right, Nioka? Yes, and as I mentioned in the PDFs, there are some more worked examples that it's taking me a while to click back. Instant headache, really? Oh, my people, my people. Guys, it's just a matter of practicing. This looks weird because you just learned it a couple of minutes ago. But as you sit with the material and practice drawing your arrows and understanding what's happening, then it becomes not so bad. All right. No, Alonzo, not till one brain cell is left. You need your brain cells, sir. You need to keep those intact. All right, Nioka, tell me where to stop. Oh, you guys are hilarious. Wait, no, who was asking the question? Nilka, yes, this is slide 2. Because slide 1, I'm sure this is slide 1. I'm sure that's not what you wanted. So this slide? Okay. This was just going through how to work out how to get the product. And we've talked about it. You erase this oxygen, you're going to lose this bromine and one of these hydrogens, and this is your product. And so by practicing doing that over and over, drawing different carbonyl compounds, drawing different alkyl halides, you'll be able to work out your product. All right? Yes, please go ahead.
No, Miss, the reason why I asked you to go back to the first slide is because you started recording on the third slide.
Oh, okay. And oh, all right. Yeah, sure. That's fine. But you guys do know that this is also in a video that has been up for a while. We did videos of this before school started. So you have videos galore, you have PDFs galore. You should not be stressed. As usual, if you have questions, you can email us. Okay, Andreas typed a question. Hydroxide is a strong nucleophile, hence a poor leaving group, right? And I know oxygen is more electronegative than carbon, but wouldn't you need to protonate the hydroxide to form water, which is a good leaving group first? Aha! All right, in this example, as I click through, we don't want the hydroxide to act as a leaving group. Remember, a leaving group has to be bonded to a carbon, and you're trying to break the bond. In this, let me click. We are using the hydroxide as a base this time, an acid-base reaction where it is pulling off a hydrogen. There must be a faster way to do these things. Which part? Where? Okay. All right. So Andrea, for it to act as a leaving group, it would have had to have been bonded to a carbon, right? No, it's not acting as a, it's acting as a base slash, remember the difference between a base and a nucleophile. A base is a nucleophile reacting with hydrogen, and nucleophiles are reacting with other atoms. That's kind of how we group it. When something reacts with a hydrogen, when it donates electrons to a hydrogen, we refer to it as a base. But when it donates electrons to, say, a carbon or some other atoms, we classify it as a nucleophile, sort of. When it's acting as a base, it is pulling the hydrogen, and we are having the electrons on the carbon. There's a slide. I am navigating through the slides, but I have 68 slides. Because I can't show animations, I am going through. And to click back, I'd miss the chat. I would miss what's going on in the chat. But thank you, Sir Hines. For the aldol, yes, this is the start of the aldol.
No, Dr. Brown. They meant that when you form, you're doing the dehydration step. When you make the alpha, beta, and saturated system, that's where they're talking.
Oh, that is an excellent question.
Yes.
And yes, you are quite right. That is an excellent question. And what should I say? Because we don't teach you this until second year. That you're just going to have to accept it for this reaction. It's a terrible thing to say. It's a terrible thing to say. All right, no, let me fix that up properly because we're in a chemistry class here. The driving force for this reaction is that we have a conjugated product. Let me fix that up because I am being recorded, right? So let's fix that up. The driving force of the reaction is that we are forming a conjugated product, which is it's stable. So stability, once again, is forcing the OH to leave. That's a very good question. Yeah, that is a good question. I hope this helps a bit, Andrea. I know it's not the answer you were looking for. The only time the OH will just hop off like that is for this particular reaction. In other elimination reactions, it needs to be protonated. So yes, we're getting a more stable compound, and heating it, we're able to lose water and form this more stable compound. Yeah. Oh, y'all got jokes. Yes, Nilka, go ahead, please. Hello? Nilka? Is your mic unmuted?
That was a mistake.
Oh, okay. All right. All right, folks. Yes, Nadisha, go ahead.
Miss, so in this instance, you're saying that the oxygen, I'm not understanding what's happening.
All right.
Right.
So Andrea raised a very good point. Normally, when we're doing our substitution reactions, where a nucleophile is coming in and kicking out the OH, we need to turn the OH into a good leaving group, right? But in this instance, this is not what's happening. Under heat, what we first do is break the carbon. Let me draw the hydrogen again. What we do is break the carbon-hydrogen bond. And these electrons come and form a pi bond, and they kick off the OH, even though traditionally an OH is not a good leaving group. But the driving force for this reaction is that we're moving from sigma bonds here, sp3 hybridized, to more stable, lower energy sp2 hybridized. And not only that, but this is conjugated. When you have alternating double, single bonds, that's known as conjugation. And conjugation enhances the stability of a molecule. So the driving force of this happening is that you get a more stable molecule. Yes. Does that help a bit, Nadisha?
Yes, Miss. Miss, wouldn't this be an elimination reaction?
Yes, it is a special kind of elimination reaction.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right, folks, any other queries before we depart? Have we been trying questions? Have we been trying to work on questions, go through the material? Hopefully, yes. I see no one saying yes. Okay, one person. All right, so remember, if you want us to look at your questions, you can always email them to us, and we'll try and there's always office hours. You can try and make use of those before the course test. Do not panic, just do the best that you can do and try to get through the material. Oh, final thing, the organic chemistry experiment for next week has been posted, so you can have a look at that. No panicking, no, Alisa. The energy that we use to panic, we can use to study. That's what we have to do. The last part about conjugation. All right, let me help with that pencil. So conjugation is any structure that has, hold on. Go ahead, Nadisha. Go ahead, Nadisha. While I draw, you can ask the question.
Miss, that was a mistake, I'm sorry.
Okay, sure. So that's a conjugated molecule. That's supposed to be an oxygen, sorry. So notice in both structures, we have double, single, double, double, single, double. So when you have double bonds, then single bonds, then double bonds, when you have alternating double and single bonds, that is referred to as a structure being conjugated. So let me see. And conjugated compounds are stable. All right, so conjugation helps to stabilize a structure. And notice that we're moving from something that is not conjugated to something that is conjugated. So just by losing water, we formed a more stable structure. So that's the point I was trying to make. why this
Um,
takes place, even though OH is not a good leaving group. Go ahead, Marcel. You had a comment?
Oh, yeah, I was just saying that this sometimes help them to understand. Think about stability as a form of currency for molecules. The less money you have to spend to exist, the more likely you're going to go to that type of existence. So this final compound, the alpha beta unsaturated compound, it's stable, meaning you would spend less energy to exist this way, in a sense. That's why that's what it's meant by being more stable.
It has lower bills. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, a lower bill, like a higher light bill versus a lower light bill. It seems to help them understand it that way, I guess.
Well, I'm like, what if I like to spend money? But anywho, yes, when you have lower expenses, you're more stable, right? And these are more lower energy bonds. We know that our sp2, having more sp2 hybridized bonds within a structure means that these structures are lower energy, right? Yes, Nadisha, I do aspire to be real rich. When I go,
Catalyst, Dr. Brown.
Pardon?
Those who like to spend a lot of money, you call them catalysts in chemistry.
I see, I'm learning. All right, wait, how come we're catalysts? What? I'm not sure. How come what now, Elise? Oh, about being rich or being catalyst? You'll have to ask Miles to explain.
Marcel said that they call people who spend a lot of money catalysts. So I'm asking how come? Because I like to